The other treatment I want to talk about is cognitive processing therapy, CPT. And I've already touched on it briefly. Just like PE, this is an evidence-based treatment. It's clinically effective. We know it works. It's based on tons of clinical trials. And as I talk through it, you'll notice it's a little more structured than PE. It's different. PE, for some people, seems like something they're not necessarily interested in. And PE does something specific that CPT doesn't do as much. PE activates that fear network. We go straight at the amygdala. That's where that fear is coming from. With CPT, we're basically saying we're going to go around the amygdala. We're going to get at those beliefs. We don't want to activate the distress or the fear as much. We want to see where it's coming from. We really want to challenge those thoughts. We start off with an impact statement, and this is looking at the trauma somewhat indirectly. We're looking back on our life and we're saying, how has this affected me? How has this affected how I think about myself? How has it affected how you think about the world, how you think about others, how you think about your future? Are there points in my life that I can look back on that maybe I thought in a different way than I do now? What changed? Why is that? Why are there those changes in my beliefs? We're trying to get at the impact, and we're trying to grab this word where we're stuck, these stuck points. And these are simply our beliefs, but they're the beliefs that keep us stuck in the trauma. This treatment takes a session-by-session approach. It's 12 sessions, and we target specific themes in each session. And these stuck points are beliefs that we're going to approach from this ABC method early on. We want to identify specific situations. We want to identify the thoughts that are there. We want to identify the emotions, the consequences, the behaviors, and become really skilled at just linking those up. Really seeing how in our day-to-day life we have something happen, we think something, we feel something. And, there's a pattern that can follow. If we start to feel anxious, we can start to have more anxious thoughts. As we start to feel fearful, more fearful thoughts. But we want to see what those thoughts are. We want to see maybe how they're keeping us stuck in a way that we think about the trauma in an unhelpful manner. We start to challenge those thoughts in terms of the evidence for and against them, but we also try to put them in a particular pattern. We want to see if maybe there are ways in which we look at the world in more of an extreme sense. For example, oftentimes people have a way of thinking about the world that almost it's like a category system. If you think about our mind in its simplest sense, the mind wants the world to be predictable. It wants to put things in categories. And a great example is if we think about a child, and they're learning from an authority figure. They're learning about animals. Cat walks in the room, and the parent says, "Hey, it's got 4 legs. It's got a tail. It's got fur. It's smaller. It jumps up on furniture." And the kid's taking this information and they say, cat. So there they go. They've got this classification, cat. And then a dog walks in the room and they see 4 legs, a tail, jumps up on the furniture. They look at it and they say cat because they don't have that delineation. And the parent explains, no, well, it's not the same. There are these differences. Sometimes it's bigger. Sometimes it behaves differently. And there's this change there where the thinking is further classified. Oh, okay. Cat, dog, these are different. This happens in terms of how we view the world and ourselves also. We often start with a just world belief. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. When a traumatic event occurs, that belief can really get challenged. We tend to understand as life goes on that sometimes bad things happen to good people and vice versa. But if we're trying to make sense of something incredibly painful in our lives, we might see something very dangerous, someone having been hurt, and view that as maybe we're a bad person because it happened to us. We might try to see some involvement of ourselves. Maybe we're to blame so that we can find more control in how we understand that. This is where we're really trying to pull those beliefs and challenge them. We want to see, are they accurate and are they functional? Once we get there to a point we can think about those beliefs, we can identify whether they're accurate and functional, that's when the skill set's really there. We build from those ABC sheets to more complex sheets that are adding in more detail and more nuance. But we get to a point that we can start to see, this stuck point log, this log of beliefs. It starts to change. This living, breathing document is morphing. And the way we think about ourselves, we might see ourselves after a traumatic event as a bad person or as having done something wrong. And if we can identify bits and pieces, places in which we are a good person, a kind person, a forgiving person, we can challenge that really firm belief of I'm a bad person, or I'm to blame, or it's my fault. We slowly chip away at those until we get to a point that those beliefs are functional and accurate. And that's something that you'll always know better than anyone else. One of the ways that we can almost take the complexity out of this or the jargon and make it sound more applicable in the day-to-day life, we want to think about how we're viewing ourselves, how we're viewing our role in different environments, maybe work, maybe school, maybe relationships. And we want to see how we might think about others and if we apply that same type of thinking to ourselves. Sometimes we can find ways in which we're stuck, where we haven't recovered from trauma in the way that we engage in that self-talk. The self-talk tends to be the thoughts that are more internal, and it's more automatic. It's just happening throughout the day. We don't tend to give it attention as much, but we want to start to slow that process down. Trying to think about if someone else in our life makes a mistake, how do we view it? Do we view it as maybe in a more balanced way? Yeah, people make mistakes. Doesn't mean a greater thing about them. Doesn't mean anything sweeping about them. And then turn that thinking inward. How would we view ourselves in that same situation? Would we give that same degree of grace, have that same degree of balance in our thinking? We can also look at the functionality. It can be difficult to really challenge the accuracy of the thinking. Let's transition into whether our thoughts are functional. We know that if we, say we have a bad day at work, or we perform in something more poorly than we would like or expect, we know that, one of the most helpful methods is to identify it, try to figure out maybe where we made some mistakes, address those and move on. But we can find that we tend to ruminate in these. We can find that we see, maybe a mistake here or there is suggestive of failure, or that we're a bad person. And we know those thoughts aren't functional. We know that that's not going to help us in the day-to-day. Accuracy and functionality, those are two of the indicators where we can look at our thoughts, try to catch a really specific thought, and ask ourselves, does this apply? Is this accurate for me? Is this functional for me?